meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
Right, then I will call this meeting to order at what time is it?
2:34.
At 2:34. And welcome everybody here. And with that, I will look to see, are there any agenda adjustments?
We have to do a roll call first, Bernie.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
That's
Serena Ayala Martinez. Ray Kavanaugh.
Hello.
Okay. Dr. Kelly.
Yes, here.
Kevin Oberg.
Here.
Jody Perrin.
Here.
And Bernie Wiegand.
here. All right. And again, I apologize about that. I'm still kind of new at this. And with that, we'll move then to the next item of the agenda adjustments, if there are any. Does any member have any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none, I will look to move to our next item, which is call to the audience. Yolanda, I don't know if you have got any speaker cards or requests. I do not.
I did not receive any.
Okay. Hearing none, I will then have us to move past this item and move on to our next item, which is a training regarding open meeting laws. This is something that is primarily for our new members. And thank you, Ray and Kevin, for joining us. But I think it'd be helpful, and I know certainly helpful for me, to get a refresher on open meeting law. So Rob, if you'll want to go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Ross. For those of you who don't know, I'm General Counsel for Tucson Unified, and part of my job is to support the committees in compliance issues such as the open meeting law, and it's always a good refresher for everyone. Do I have the ability to share screen, Yolanda? I do not hear you.
Go ahead and sorry about that. Go ahead and try, and if not, I can let you.
Okay.
Let's see.
Working?
Yes, you can see.
All right. Okay, so I wanted to just give a 15-20 minutes on open meeting law and the overview of it. Hopefully some of you have experienced this. If not, it's fine. It's not that challenging, but and I'm always here for questions at any time. And if you have questions as we go, please speak up. I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about in the overview. What is the OML, as we call it? When's it applicable? What are the notices that are required? What needs to be on your agendas? A little bit about executive sessions, which you will have some in this committee, and what's required in minutes, and then what does the public have the right to do and not to do, and then what happens if there's a violation of the open meeting law. So those are our topics here in the next few minutes. So here's the statute in Arizona statutes 38431 and everything that follows that in Title 38. The purpose of the open meeting law is really for openness. You know, the government is not supposed to be done in private for the most part. And like it or not, you're government now in this committee. You're part of a government organization. The Arizona Attorney General is the organization that will usually enforce this. They'll get complaints and investigate them. And they've said that anybody who basically tries to avoid the open meeting law is violating the open meeting law. So if you're saying, okay, how can I get around this? You have to think about, well, we shouldn't be trying to get around it. the default is it's an open, and there has to be a good exception for you not to be having a discussion in public if it's about the business of the committee. And if you haven't had a chance yet, take a look at your charter, and you'll see what your scope is for business of the committee. The Attorney General said that again that this is supposed to be government's supposed to be done in the open, and that you're in trouble if you get around it. Try to get around it without any justification. So where is it applicable? It's to public bodies. So any elected or appointed body of government, it's applicable to that. Advisory committees such as this one, the audit committee is an advisory committee, and any subcommittee. So if the audit committee decides to create a subcommittee, for example, I don't know, interviewing new audit committee members, and you say, okay, we're gonna pick 3 of you to do that. That subcommittee is also subject to the open meeting law. If you have a subcommittee that's going to, talk to the external auditors, if you decide to do that for some reason, that subcommittee would also be subject to the requirements of the open meeting law. So it's applicable whenever the committee has a meeting, and a meeting means a quorum, which is, a majority of the committee plus 1. That's a quorum, and that's a majority of the the appointed actively serving members. So if, for example, this committee has, I think you can be 5 to 7 members. If you have 5 members, then your quorum is 3. If you have 7, then your quorum's 4, and so on. So anytime that a quorum of this committee gets together and discusses committee business at all, that's considered a meeting. It doesn't matter where you are. It could be, here. It could be if a quorum of you show up, in Albuquerque and talk about committee business, then that is a meeting, and the open meeting law requirements need to apply. It applies whether you are meeting electronically, such as you are here, or if you're on a group telephone call. As long as you've got a quorum, then and you're discussing committee business, that is a meeting. One of the things that you need to be careful about, maybe not so much when we're doing this via Zoom, but if you're meeting physically, and then the meeting's over and you all walk out into the parking lot together, if there's a quorum of you and you're still having a discussion about committee business, that's technically could be a meeting, and you need to be careful of the open meeting law. Social events is an interesting one. Again, if you're discussing committee business, then you have to be worried about the open meeting law. But sometimes, you may end up seeing a quorum of you at a U of A basketball game or something. That's not a meeting unless you start talking about committee business. So, that we have all sorts of events in Tucson that you'll see, movers and shakers like you all at, basketball games, football games. And, as long as you can definitely talk to each other about, about whether Arizona's going to lead the Pac-12 or whatever. But if you start talking about audit committee business, then one of you hopefully will say, wait a second, we can't do this here unless, you all leave and we're no longer a quorum. But then you also have to have a concern about, okay, we've started this conversation with 2 of us, and now one of us is going to a 3rd one, or enough to make a quorum, and you're discussing the same committee business. That could be a violation as well. So you can't do it in series, just like you can't do it as a group. So you have to be very careful about how many people on the committee have I talked to about this topic outside of a meeting. And if that adds up to a quorum, then you're at a big risk of an open meeting law violation. So it doesn't have to be all at once. It can be serially. It can be in an email chain. I would be very careful about, forwarding email chains among members. One of the exceptions to that is, and you've done this already, is just logistics. Like we need to have a meeting on this date. Is everybody available? That's not a violation. That's just logistics, and there really isn't really any other way to do that. You're not, how are you going to call a meeting if you don't talk to people about when they can be there for a meeting? So that's okay. But once you start getting into, yeah, and I really want to talk about, some of these issues that were in this audit report. Now you're getting into danger zone with the open meeting law. So the general rule is if you are together as a quorum and you're talking about committee business, it's got to be in public, and all the requirements of the open meeting law need to be met for that meeting. Okay, so what are those requirements? Number one is at least 24 hours prior notice of any time you're going to get together to discuss committee business. That's taken care of pretty easily by staff here, and it's almost always well more than 24 hours that the notice is given. It's probably going to be pretty rare that you're bumping up against that 24-hour notice with this committee, because you do schedule your things out pretty far ahead. But it's possible in the future you may get a report that comes in and the chair decides we need to meet on this right away. Maybe the board's going to be taking it up the next week, and you don't have time to give our usual 72 hours, but you need to get together within close up to that 24 hours. As long as it's 24 hours notice, then you're in good shape from the open meeting law standpoint. The expectation here is more, both with the governing board and with this committee. So the notice has to be to the public, and that's done again by staff through our website. And also, there are ways for the public can just come in and ask, but we also have that the website is really the main place. And we have our board docs program, which I hope you've seen already. We have all that information available to the public as well. And the notice also has to be to the members of the it says governing board, but to the committee. So the notice is not just to the public, but also to each member of the committee. And believe me, that has happened before, not here, but in another district that I worked in, where where a committee was, yeah, we're going to notice a quorum, but not those two people we don't really like, and tried to make a meeting without them. And of course, we had to throw the flag on that one. Where's the notice to those members? That was one where they tried to do a quick meeting. And that was again in another district in another state that I was in. So the notice is to the public, and that's on the website, and to all members of the committee. Now your agendas, and this becomes people have different ideas of what's on an agenda, and there's expectations that go beyond the law here in Tucson Unified. So the agenda has to specifically list the items to be discussed or decided. So basically the topic in language that the public would be able to understand. You're not hiding it behind technical accounting terms or something like it. Just plain language. We're going to talk about the 2022 single audit. That's good enough. What the statute does not require is that all the attachments be published. That is a bit of an expectation here with the governing board, and this committee also does a very good job of publishing on the board docs site attachments to the extent that they're available. But just keep in mind that just because it's not attached doesn't mean that you violated the law. It may be difficult for you to proceed with an item if you haven't had enough time in advance to review the materials, but it's not a legal violation. It's more of a practical, we're not going to be able to get through this, 40 pages of dense accounting information if we haven't had a couple of days to review it, kind of thing. You haven't violated the law. Again, the agenda should be in plain language so that a normal person on the street would have a good idea of what it is you're going to be discussing. You all should be keep in mind that agenda topic drift, discussion drift. You may have an issue that you've got your agendized item on a single audit, for example, and then there's a line in there that you go off on a tangent and start talking about, something that's not really part of the single audit, but, what do we do about technology that addresses transportation, but that's not part of the single audit. If it's off agenda, the chair is primarily responsible for keeping y'all on track. But I would encourage everybody, if they think that you're getting, if you're getting a field from what the agenda says, to just pipe up and say that sounds like an issue for another agenda that's not part of this agenda, or at least ask the question of the chair: is this germane to the actual agenda that we're talking about? You don't want to get into a situation where you may have an awesome conversation about something, but you have not put it on the agenda. The public would have no idea that you were going to discuss that, and then there's a possible violation of the open meeting law. So you all should feel empowered to at least raise that issue with the chair. If I'm here, or one of our other attorneys is here, we might raise it if you're getting too far away from the agenda. Every once in a while, I'll let the chair know that I'm not sure that's on the agenda. Okay, this went backwards. I pressed something wrong. Okay, so we've talked about agenda, executive sessions, and these are private, not open to the public sessions of the committee. And there are very limited purposes legally that a public body can do an executive session. Number one is legal questions, legal advice. So you will have me or another attorney. You have specific legal questions that you want to discuss. That we maintain the attorney-client privilege. You are one of the clients as a committee of the board. So if there's legal advice to be given, we protect that privilege, and we do those in an executive session. Executive sessions, sometimes they are noticed. Sometimes a question comes up in the middle of a meeting, and you have a legal question that you can ask me or another attorney, and then we can decide whether or not it's something that can be answered in public, or whether it's something that should be subject to attorney-client privilege, and then basically kick all the public out and just have an executive session on that subject. In this committee, that's very rare that it comes up spontaneously. You are usually the legal advice that happens with this committee, and it doesn't happen that often, is scheduled, and you'll put it on the agenda, and you'll vote to go into an executive session, and we'll discuss legal advice. Another legal authorization for an executive session is negotiations, contracts that are subject to negotiation. This committee has, as part of its charge, the vetting of an external auditors. There's a possibility, though not very likely, that you would be involved in negotiating contracts with them. That's unlikely to happen, but it's possible the board could delegate that. So that's a possible executive session. Personnel issues regarding assignment, performance, dismissal, or salaries. Again, that's very rare for this committee. However, you do interview on occasion. This committee has interviewed candidates for the internal auditor position, and also for membership on this committee. And those are personnel matters that can be done in an executive session. And again, those are noticed. Just remember that if you're going to talk about an employee and their performance, then they need to be noticed of the meeting. They get an opportunity to ask for it in public. So if there's going to be a personnel issue, then I would recommend that you connect with the legal department, and we will help put it on the agenda and make sure that the notices are given. The staff that supports you are used to doing that. They know how to do it, but I can help also, and the other attorney here can help with language. Discussion of confidential records. It's possible that the statute allows for this, and they have to be confidential by some other statute. You can't just say they're confidential. It has to be protected by some other federal or state law. For example, very recently, the legislature decided that security plans for a school are confidential records. So if for some reason there's maybe an audit of that involves that, and you have records that talk about the security systems of a school, then that can be in an executive session. And of course, the legislature's reason for that is we don't want the bad guys knowing, where the vulnerable parts of our schools are to get in. So the legislature made that a confidential record. And then student matters, which you will not get into. This committee is highly unlikely to get into student matters such as student discipline, naming individual students. But those are the executive session authorizations in the statute. And just remember that there will still be an agenda that lists the executive session matters, and minutes are still required. And that's only, and those minutes are private, and they can only be accessed by committee members or by subpoena, or the attorney general can get them. So there is a record of it. It's just that it's not subject to public records laws. I wouldn't be able to disclose it if somebody made a records request for it, like any other public record. Again, these sessions are private and confidential, but there still is a record of it in case authorities want to see it or there's a subpoena. Okay, virtual meetings like this are fine under the statute, under the open meeting law. They do have to be easily accessible. You can't have to pay to download some app in order to access it. These are pretty easily accessible. We've been doing them for years. I think we've got that down pretty well. The law has to allow the public to view the proceedings live. You can't just post the recording and not have it available live while it's happening. So that's a requirement, which is why we do these live via Zoom. And then any notice that you publish on the virtual meeting should give instructions. It's not specifically in the statute, but it just makes sense, since you're not supposed to be operating in private, that you're going to hide how to access. If you change from Zoom to something else, some other platform, you should give those directions in the notice of the meeting. Okay, we talked about quorum. In order to hold any meeting, you have to have a quorum, you know that, and that's a majority of your membership plus one. And just remember, anytime that you count to a quorum with your group, then if you're talking about committee information, then that's a meeting and it's subject to the open meeting law, and you should probably stop talking about it unless you're at a meeting. Again, we talked about being careful in parking lots as you're leaving, if you ever do physical meetings. And email communications, be very careful about forwarding from 2 of you to a couple more to make a quorum, or doing it in chains where you're adding one more person that makes that quorum requirement. That could be a violation. So be very careful about that. What our board members do and other committees will sometimes do is just put a notice on an email that's talking about committee business between a couple of people, not to forward it. Just please don't forward this. We want to comply with the open meeting law. And then, you're always thinking about it. Hopefully, if I'm talking about audit committee stuff, then I need to always count how many people of the committee have been part of this communication. It's a restriction. I mean, it limits doing business, but that's the statute. You got to do it. Again, telephone calls, once you've had a chain of people, just like an email, talking about a committee business, if you've reached that quorum, then it's a potential violation. And we talked about social events. As long as you're not talking about committee business, you're fine to see each other in Safeway or whatever. Okay, minutes. The statute says that you can have minutes recorded or minutes in writing. The official approach of this committee has been the official minutes are written. And this committee has approved those written minutes at each meeting when there's minutes available from the previous one. You could just designate the recording as your minutes. The governing board doesn't do that, and neither does this committee. However, the statute does say you have to have a record available within 3 working days. And since this committee in particular, this is a good example, you don't meet to approve minutes. So what we do to comply with the statute is post the video and audio within 3 days. And so the public has access to that very quickly. But then your official minutes aren't official until you've approved the written ones at your next meeting. But for statutory compliance, the governing board and this committee do the same thing, which is just post the audio and video, and you have complied with the statute by doing that. And again, the executive session minutes are taken, but they remain confidential unless they are subpoenaed. But if let's say you're one of you didn't attend this meeting today, you couldn't make it, you would be able to get the executive session minutes from the meeting you didn't attend because you're a member of the committee. But nobody else would be able to unless there's a subpoena. Okay, what's required in the minutes? You have to have all the details of where it was and when it was, who was present, the general description of the matters considered. This doesn't have to be a verbatim transcript of the discussion. It basically can be the topic, and that's usually your agenda item, and that's good enough for the description of the matters considered. An accurate description of the decisions made. So that's where it's the art of drafting a motion and stating a motion on the record. And it's up to staff in the first instance to make sure that that's captured. But the other way to do it is to, in your discussion, be clear about what your motions are on the record. So the minutes have to include that description of decisions made coming from your motions. And then the law requires the names of members who propose each motion. So the procedures with this committee are to make a motion and then have it seconded. The statute doesn't require the second, but your procedures do. So all your minutes are going to say who made a motion and who provided the second on the motion. And then the names of the people making presentations to the group and any action taken on the group. So you'll list my name will be on the agenda as making a presentation. And this isn't an action item, so there'd be no action taken on it. But if there was an action item afterwards, then that has to be in the minutes. Okay, so and one more note on minutes. When you are approving minutes, it's up to you, but just because you weren't at a meeting doesn't mean you can't vote to approve the minutes. What you can do is make sure, okay, I see that all of the legal requirements of minutes are here. It actually accurately describes what happened. It says who made motions. It says what the result was. You're free to vote on that, even if you weren't at a meeting. But you're also free not to, saying I'm not comfortable with that. That's fine. I'm just, this has been a question every once in a while with committees. Well, I wasn't there. How can I vote on the minutes? Well, you're not voting because you were there. You're voting, do they meet the requirements of, you're approving whether they meet the requirements of the statute. Okay, members of the public, they have the right, since this is a public meeting, they have the right to attend and listen. They can also audio or video record a public meeting. Now, that doesn't mean they can be disruptive about it. Let's say you were in the governing board meeting and they're standing right in front of you and holding a microphone to your face. That could be disruptive. They don't have the right to do that, but they can they can hold their phone up and record you. I don't know why they do that, because you're recording your meetings anyway, but some people want to do that, have their own recording of it. But they have a right to do that under the statute. What they don't have a right to do is to speak during your meeting, other than the call to the audience portion. and that's only by policy. That's not by statute. There's no statute that gives right to call to the audience. It's only board policy and this committee's practice that allows call to the audience or speaking. So they don't have a right to speak. The public doesn't. They also don't obviously have a right to disrupt the meeting. When a disruption does occur, then they can be kicked out. And my recommendation is always give a couple of warnings before you go nuclear on them and kick them out of a meeting. It's easier in Zoom. Yolanda can just mute them, right? Okay, so when you do have a call of the audience, remember it's not required by statute, but you have a policy, board has a policy, BDFA, that says all committees will have a call to the audience. When you have a comment from the audience, there are very few things that the committee members can do in response to that. The statute says you can respond to individual criticism. So if somebody says, yeah, that Mr. Wiegand, he knows nothing about accounting. Mr. Wiegand in the response could say, actually, I know a little bit about it. I'm a CPA and I've been doing this for X number of years. I mean, you could do that. That's authorized under the statute. You can ask the staff to review a matter and you can ask to place on a future agenda. You cannot get into a discussion about what somebody says at call to the audience. So respond to individual criticism, ask the staff to review a matter, or place it on a future agenda. That's it. Sometimes somebody will bring up something really juicy and it sounds worthy of discussion. Do it at another meeting. Otherwise, you run into an open meeting law violation. Okay, so what happens if there is a violation? Any actions you take are null and void. So you'll have to go back and do it again. If it's intentional, a $500 penalty is assessed for each, can be assessed for each violation plus attorney's fees. And it's not the district that pays that. It's whoever did the violation and anybody who helped them. So it's a personal obligation to pay any penalties. And if the intent is to provide, the intent of the violation is to deprive public of information, so you're intentionally getting around the open meeting law, then you can be removed from office and pay costs and fees. These are things that very, very rarely happen. The Attorney General will usually give a harsh letter and warning, but it can happen. It happened in Scottsdale a couple of years ago. But this is the potential for a violation. If you do see a violation, flag it, say, hey, I think we missed that one. If we can go back and do another meeting and redo an action that was taken in violation of the meeting, it's called ratification. If that happens, I'm here to help with that. We can get it scheduled correctly and go back and redo the issue that was done in violation. For example, maybe you did an action that was not on the agenda. Well, let's ratify that. Let's go back, get a new meeting, do a proper notice, vote on it again. It's not the end of the world. If it hopefully only it was done, unintentionally. If it's intentional, then there may be other possibilities such as these penalties for violations. Okay, that was a lot in a 25 minutes or so. Any questions about it at all?
Ross, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So just going back to the call for the audience, and I just wanted to know if it was different than when we do it at the governing board. Because I know when we address the call for the audience, not more than 2 members can address the different speakers. Is that the same for the audit, or was it just not put on that screen?
That is the same, because the theory is, well, it's a quorum. So you want to be less than a quorum, right? So and that's because something's not on the agenda. You don't want to, it was a weird rule that the AG did there, but just no more than you don't want to reach that quorum piece. So I would agree, and the AG would say no more than 2 people should comment on the same issue. Now, here's an interesting quirk of that. If somebody gets up there and does an individual criticism of every single member, of each of those is one comment, right? So if they say that, you know, they name each, you know, what, name 4 of you, all 4 of you can say, I'm going to respond to the criticism about me. That's okay to do. But if someone gets up there and says, you know what, the legal department's budget is out of control. Only 2 of you should comment on that. And the comment would be what? There you have 2 choices at that point. There's no individual criticism of a committee member, right? So that's out. You can ask that it be placed on a future agenda, or you can ask staff to look into it. That's it. Those are your options left, because that, you know, that example, it's not an individual criticism. But if someone just criticizes the committee as a whole, this whole committee is you know, a bunch of losers. Well, 2 of you can respond to that unless they name you individually. If they start naming you, each of you can say, you know what, I do know what I'm talking about here. Here's my experience. That's fair game. But if they just like paint it with a broad brush, this whole committee is a waste of resources. Well, 2 of you can say, you know, it's not. Here are the important things that we do for this community. 2 of you could do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that one. And then just one more question. If do most of the rules follow like the governing board meeting? So like the call to the audience, speakers have 3 minutes if they talk, if someone came to the audit committee and wanted to speak?
That's set by this committee.
Okay.
So the governing board has not, in its policy, has not designated how much time someone gets in call to the audience at committee, in its committees. Only for itself has it done that. So if this committee decided that it wanted to let people speak for half an hour, I would question your sanity, but you could do that.
All right, thanks for clearing my questions.
Other questions? All right, well, again, welcome to the new members. And again, we in the legal department also serve you. You're part of this district administration and leadership. And if any of you have a question about open meeting law or anything else legal, I'm here to help. If it's something that's committee-wide, I may suggest to the chair that you put it on an agenda and talk to everybody about it. But if you have individual questions about it, I'm always happy to help. The other thing that I'll be doing is sending to you all just some information about conflict of interest. It's, you know, as members of the district committees, then those apply to you as well. And it's unlikely that something will come up that's a legal conflict of interest for you, but I want to make sure you have that information. So I'll send that to everybody in the next week or so.
All right, Rob, thank you. We appreciate that. That was really good information. And just ironically as it is, today actually begins my 47th year in public accounting. So I may or may not have that credential that you were speaking of. With that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the expenditure update. And Ricky will be presenting that to us. Thank you, Ricky.
So this is the expenditure update through the end of May 2023. Just for some context, I haven't been giving an update to the governing board on the expenditure updates. The feedback I've gotten from a few board members has been that these, you know, they don't necessarily contribute a lot of value. And I've asked for some kind of information from governing board members on what they'd like to see. But in the meantime, as long as the audit committee would like to have these, I certainly will put them together. So this is the most current one. It's brief, about 4 slides long. It's got a lot of detail, but I've uploaded all of the reports that kind of expand upon these summaries in the audit committee's board agenda items, so or committee agenda items. So you'll be able to see those individually in greater detail. So diving in, this is the budget balances by fund. These are all the individual kind of major funds, if you will, for the district. Maintenance and operations is what we generally classify as our general fund. We have different funds that become part of the general fund from a financial statement perspective, but these are the funds from just a fund balance, a fund accounting perspective. So as you can see, there's a lot of shift everywhere. I'm not going to go through the entirety of all these. I don't know if anything sticks out, and feel free to ask me any questions as you kind of see through this. I do want to point out that there are a few towards kind of like the bottom 2/3 of the listing that have an asterisk attached to them. Those are cash controlled accounts. So in the district, not every account or not every fund that we operate out of has a budget assigned to it. Basically, if you have cash to spend, you have the capacity to do so. We certainly want to attach budgets to some of those, but they're not necessarily budget controlled. Simply, they're provided to our individual schools and departments for guidance in terms of up or down and how far they can kind of move their dollars. Because ESSER is still part of our lives here for another 13 months, we've kind of, I've provided you a subtotal that includes all of our ESSER funds, ESSER 2 and 3, since ESSER 1 has now expired. And then a net total that backs out ESSER to kind of give you more of a true sense of where we are from a budget balance perspective when you don't account for ESSER funds. Since, like I said, it's such a significant portion of money still that's flowing through the district for the next 13 months. Does anybody have any questions on this specific slide? Okay.
Ricky, this is Bernie Weekend. I've got just a couple, and one's based on that, as well as on the federal grant line. That's the 5th line that shows that the fund balance has a negative balance of $21.6 million. Is that just that there are grant receivables?
Correct.
That that group of grants hasn't received yet the district has expended?
Correct. Yeah, all of the federal grants and all of the state grants that we received from either the federal government directly or passed through the Department of Education are all reimbursement style grants. So we have to spend, we provide every 30 days, we provide a copy of our year to date or month to date ledger. And then the Department of Education, whether the federal or the state, will essentially distribute cash to us in order to make up that difference. So at the end of May, we still had a substantial amount, and a lot of it had to do, in full disclosure, with the fact that there was a delay by our external auditors to issue a single audit. And because of that, the Department of Ed put a global hold on all of our federal accounts. So we were unable to request disbursements of cash. But in the month of June, those, now that the single audit has been turned in, that global hold was lifted before Memorial Day. And so those dollars will begin flowing in the month of June. So really, it's just a timing issue because they're all reimbursement style.
Understood. I guess, though, as a practical matter, how has the district necessarily been able to make those expenditures? What cash balances were present to be able to have that big a negative, or is it as a result of the other positives that are showing elsewhere? Yeah,
so at the county treasury, there are 4 major cash accounts. There's a general account, which holds, and I haven't grouped them, and I can certainly provide the grouping to the audit committee if you'd like to see that. But we're provided 4 different accounts that hold, from a cash perspective, all of our different types of cash. So essentially, the state law allows us to spend dollars in the federal grants so long as we have positive cash balances in our general fund. If we happen to not have positive cash balances in our general account, then the county treasurer is allowed to register warrants. So essentially, write IOUs on behalf of the district, and then we repay them when cash is available plus interest. We've never been in that position to have to do that. We have sufficient cash in our general fund, our Fund 100 as it's called, and our miscellaneous revenue account, which is Fund 360, that provides sufficient cash to back the warrants that are issued against the federal grants. And since we receive
And-
disbursements every 30 days, generally it's never going to be more than 30 days that goes by before that federal grant gets replenished.
Sure, but during this time, though, that's been longer
Right.
period of
Yeah.
time, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And I get a report from the county treasurer every month on our cash balance situation, just to make sure that, you know, that there isn't anything kind of really pulling us in one direction, especially considering that we're one of the largest jurisdictions that the county treasurer manages. And so anything that moves in the wrong direction will certainly cause her to raise some red flags, but we haven't been in that position with our cash balance.
Right, very well. And then is the ESSER grant line effectively the same situation?
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
And now, is that, do those accumulate together, or is
Yeah,
there some overlap there that ESSER grants also are part of the federal grant line?
The ESSER grants are part of the federal grant line. The only reason I'm presenting to you discreetly is because it's such a significant amount of money that I wanted to kind of pull them out and show you what it looks like with kind of just a quote unquote normal sense of operations without this large pot of external funding coming through, and what it looks like with it included. So it's just presenting it a little bit discreetly to show you some variances. But ultimately, that $74.8 million is part of that $152 million adjusted budget for federal grants.
That's it. Okay. And was that also under the same delay that the single audit delay created?
Yes.
All right, very well, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. So this is just a grouping of just expenses by fund type and expense type, so that you can kind of see them on a more global category, what these look like: salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, property, which is essentially capital, and then just miscellaneous expenses, and what the different groupings of funds have expended through the end of May. Obviously, our general fund is our single largest expense, over 317 million, or almost $317 million of our expenses. 90%, well over 90% of our expenses are related to personnel. So salaries and benefits provide almost, well over $400 million worth of our activities, our expense type activities. So through the end of May, we had $560 million worth of expenses go out the door. Like I said, about 90% of that is personnel, which is not unusual or uncommon for us or for most jurisdictions of our size. These are projected fund balances. So just to kind of give you some context, school districts, other than those cash accounts, we don't run on fund balance, we run on budget, right? But ultimately, we still have to take a look at our cash, our inflows and our outflows, just to make sure that we're managing exactly where we want to be, particularly when we have estimates for budget balance carry forward. We should certainly have sufficient cash in the bank in order to cover any budget balances that we're estimating are going to move forward from one fiscal year to the next. Because in school district finance, those budget balances become an additional increase to our operating budget, particularly actually in all of those that are budget controlled, not so much in the cash controlled accounts, because that cash, the budget balances for the cash controlled accounts, those certainly, we treat those exactly on a projected fund balance. So we want to make sure that revenues and expenses plus our beginning balances are always at zero or above in order for expenses to go out the door. These are projections based on incoming payments that we expect. So the month of June, we tend to receive a significant portion of our state aid, for example. One of the things that that the state of Arizona does to school districts in particular is that they withhold a significant portion of our state aid, generally about 10% of our state aid, as part of, to kind of for the state to be able to balance their own budget books. They create a liability on their side, and then they pay it immediately after July 1, and they expense it on their new fiscal year budget. So we expect some of these ending balances to basically end up exactly like that. That M&O, for example, says $53.5 million. We don't have that today. We expect that by the end of fiscal year, we will have that money in the bank once essentially the state of Arizona makes good to TUSD on what it owes for state aid. All of the other ones are trued up to the extent that we know. Like you can see, the federal grants to cash position is better here because I've seen the cash management reimbursement grant or reimbursement request to the Department of Ed, and we're expecting those to start dispersing to us over the next several weeks. So we know that our fund balances will certainly, move in the other direction once cash starts to hit the school district. But overall, we continue to be in a very strong cash position from a fund balance perspective. Any questions on this slide? Okie doke. And then the last biggest one, I know that this is something that in particularly for the governing board is important, for the community is definitely very important, is our trends for classroom spending. The column in red is the estimate right now based on expenses that we've incurred through the end of May. We've continued to move in the right direction. Even though there is a slight dip in some of the, the larger kind of categories that people tend to focus on, specifically instruction. You'll see that we're estimating about a 2.5% drop in instruction. However, that can be accounted by the fact that we're putting more dollars into student support. Student support is things like attendance, special ed services, English language development services, for example, counseling. We've put a lot of money into that. A lot of our federal funds obviously account for that. Our plan operations, just a significant increase in the amount of money that we're putting into actually just maintaining our facilities, being able to just kind of keep the lights on. If you saw, in the month of April, we had to go back to the governing board to ask for $3.5 million in new expenditure authority for utilities. Utilities is the single largest cost of operating the district outside of the classrooms, electricity in particular. And, and all of the other ones, transportation, food service, you can see that those expenses have gone up. Administration, I know, is a big focus, 8.2 to 8.6, but we've essentially hovered around that under 9%, which I know tends to be historically kind of the trigger for us to know, to try to figure out what's going on. But again, this is only through the end of May. June, we certainly have a lot of expenses that go out the door, and then the district has a 60-day encumbrance period. So we continue to close our books out through the end of August. So this red column is certainly subject to change, but we continue to stay in a strong position with our classroom spending, where essentially 71 cents of every dollar we're putting right back into students and teachers. And that's it. I don't know if anybody has additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Hearing none, I think we'll move on now to our next item then, which are the minutes of our May 19th, 2023 meeting. And I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to review those. But with that, I will look for a motion to approve these minutes.
This is Jody. Motion to approve.
And I will second that. Thank you, Jody. So we have a motion to approve the minutes with a second. Is there any discussion regarding these minutes? Seeing none, hearing none, I will go ahead and take this to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye.
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 I believe I've gotten three ayes at this point. Just want to be sure, Ray and Bill, if you necessarily wanted to get in on this, or if you would be inclined to vote no. You're muted, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill, are you trying to get in? Well, with that, I believe,
I voted yes.
okay, thank you, Bill. All right, I believe then we have a passing motion, the motion is passed. And so we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the single audit presentation. And I believe that Ricky is going to provide the presentation on behalf of the auditors who unfortunately could not be here today on this scheduled date.
Yeah, unfortunately, our auditors are both on vacation. They got as far away from Tucson as possible, I guess. So I just gonna give you an overview of what the single audit looked like. The report that we've already provided to all of the external agencies. So this has gone to the Auditor General's office, our federal audit clearinghouse, and to the Department of Education. So single audit report, just to kind of give everybody a little bit of background. So any non-federal entity that spends over $750,000 in federal dollars in any given fiscal year is required to have a single audit. It's essentially just a federal, like an audit of just your federal programs. And I've given you kind of a link to the Code of Federal Regulations where you can kind of get a pretty lengthy description of requirements and what we need to do. There are four main scopes to the audit. Obviously, it has to be conducted in accordance to GAGAS, determines the fair presentation of our financial statements and our CFA, which is our schedule of expenditures of federal awards, provides an opinion on our internal controls based on compliance supplements that OMB issues. So Office of Management and Budget at the federal level will put out compliance supplements on specific things that they want auditors to focus on when they're creating, when they're performing their single audit review. This year it was ESSER. It will probably be ESSER again next fiscal year. And then the Child Nutrition Program or the National School Lunch. And then obviously reviewing that we comply with all federal statutes and regulations, the terms and conditions of any awards that we might get directly from the federal government. So it's a pretty extensive review of just our federal activity, especially considering that we receive such a significant amount of money. So just a quick kind of high level summary of the report. We've provided you in the committee agenda item a copy of the report directly from Clifton Larson Allen, a copy of the management letter that was also issued, and a copy of the corrective action plan that the district created in order to respond to some of the findings. And I'll provide kind of a summary here. But Clifton Larson issued their audit report on the 7th, actually, so earlier this month. We did have a few internal control findings. One was material weakness was identified, and 3 significant deficiencies. A material weakness, I provided you kind of a definition But essentially a material weakness is kind of more significant, if you will, than a significant deficiency, because potentially it might misrepresent our financial statements. And I'll go through those kind of in summary of what it was and what we've done to kind of fix those. So nevertheless, the CLA, Clifton Larson Allen, issued an unmodified federal report. So they provided a clean report on all our major federal programs, essentially determining that we're overall in compliance with the federal mandates regarding all of our federal programs. And like I mentioned, the two major programs that we reviewed were ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary School Education or Emergency Relief Act. So the COVID money that came to schools, and child nutrition programs, school lunch. So finding number one was disaster recovery procedures in IT. They determined that we didn't conduct what's called a tabletop or technical testing based on our disaster recovery procedures in fiscal year 22. This was the only material weakness. Obviously, the recommendation for them is to conduct this tabletop testing to evaluate the effectiveness of our existing disaster recovery procedures. I know that we, in speaking to our technology services department, there is a certain level of testing that is provided, but what specifically was being sought after was this tabletop technical testing that is provided, which is kind of just an end user type of testing to discover weak points on somebody being able to enter through, just through the end user, through somebody just like me or, like Yolanda, for example, or anybody who just has an entry level kind of point to technology. So as part of our corrective action, we will conduct this tabletop testing on our enterprise resource planning system, which is Visions, by the end of this month. We will conduct this testing up to 2 times a year, and this will be documented as part of our disaster recovery plan review. In addition to that, all employees of the district are going to be required to attend 2 cybersecurity trainings. These cybersecurity trainings meet the standards of the Arizona Department of Homeland Security, and these all must be completed by the end of August. So we're giving people these trainings were made available in mid-May, before the single audit was put out in response to obviously the district cyber attack that happened back in February, and now everybody is required to perform these or to complete these trainings by the end of August. Finding number 2, the safeguard of district accounting records. So because of the cyber attack, we lost records in regards to our physical inventory. We're required to complete a physical inventory every 3 years of everything, obviously, that meets our general fixed assets and our stewardship requirements. All of that data that was collected by my predecessor and the team that worked on that, unfortunately, was lost during the interim period between the single audit being performed and the cyber attack taking place. We didn't have a backup. We were unable to essentially provide our auditors with verification that we completed the inventory that's required. So their recommendation is obviously that we design controls to ensure that all our historical accounting records are always safeguarded and backed up. We've taken a multi-step approach to that. One of the biggest things is that we no longer have on-prem or basically on-premise servers for any of our ERP systems. Everything is now cloud-based and hosted by Tyler Technologies, which is the manufacturer of iVisions, of our accounting system. They create redundant backups of all of their systems as part of their own disaster recovery protocols. And the district downloads all of that accounting and financial data separately onto our own cloud-based server that is essentially creating an air gap between us and Tyler, so that there's always a redundant copy existing between the software vendor and us. All the cloud migration for our ERP was completed by the end of March. A new inventory is currently underway, and we expect that to be completed by the end of the first fiscal quarter on September 30th. Third finding was regarding prevailing wages. So we discovered that we were notified that the district did not verify with all of the vendors who perform construction projects with federal dollars that they were meeting the prevailing wage requirements under Davis-Bacon. It's a requirement of all federal awards that spend at least $250,000 on construction projects. ESSER particularly was kind of the culprit here because we spent a lot of ESSER funding on a lot of kind of construction projects. We weren't necessarily building buildings, but we were making major infrastructure changes to the district. So the recommendation from Clifton is obviously we review our contract procedures to ensure that all of our prevailing wage rules and clauses are incorporated in our contracts with our vendors so that they're always aware that they have to maintain records and certify payrolls to meet Davis-Bacon requirements. So our corrective action was all Davis-Bacon requirements. We knew that this was going to happen. We knew that we had contracts that did not meet this requirement. By July 1st of last fiscal year, all of the Davis-Bacon requirements were implemented. Currently, the purchasing department is working with vendors where we don't have that documentation to get that documentation from them so that we can have it on file and on record in the district. We expect that to be completed by the end of next fiscal year, so by June of 2024, simply because it's having to go back through timesheets and time cards and all of the payroll that these vendors have to keep to ensure that they met the prevailing wage requirement. And going forward, obviously, all our RFPs, IFBs, RFQs have a special section on federal requirements where we disclose the fact that they have to maintain documentation to meet Davis-Bacon. So we make sure that every vendor signifies in the affirmative that they've read the contract, they've read the RFP or the documentation, that they certify that they're going to meet all of the requirements in our terms and conditions, which includes specifically these federal requirements. Finding number 4 was kind of a combination of time and effort and authorized wage rates. So the finding from them was that they felt that we were not completing time and effort certifications in a timely manner for employees who specifically separated from the district. So a little bit of background for some of you who may not know, anytime you're paid with federal dollars, you're required to maintain an activity report for every employee's time and effort towards the cost objectives of a grant. So if you're being paid out of Title I, and that's all you do, you have to maintain at least twice a year. You have to certify that, hey, I worked on Title I activities the entire fiscal year from this period to this period. Well, with turnover, we have people who may leave in October and we collect these in December. So we have to make sure, we have a policy on time and effort certifications. We have to make sure that we're following that policy on maintaining that documentation. So this was updated in December of 2022 so that we can make sure that we find alternative methods to tie back the time that the employees who are paid with federal dollars. And we can find documentation to say, yes, this person spent, 80 hours a week for the entire, or 80 hours a pay period for 6 months or whatever the time frame may be on meeting the cost objectives of whatever federal project they were paid from. So that is currently in practice, that is currently in place, and that is currently what's happening. The flip side of it is it was determined that human resources was not retaining sufficient evidence to determine that authorized wage rates were being applied and paid to individuals. So in this instance, for example, we use an electronic personnel authorization or personnel action request form that says, we're going to pay Bernie $10 an hour to do tutoring after school from 3 to 5, 3 days a week, or whatever the case may be. But there was nothing to verify that the wage rate that we were going to pay Bernie, for example, was the actual legitimate rate when other people may be earning more than Bernie for doing the same amount of work. And there was no documentation or no justification in the records, in some of the records that were tested. This wasn't in every record, but in some of the records they tested to find that we had the information necessary to say that this was actually the rate that this person should be paid, because there were just inconsistencies in the types of work and the different rates. The new Chief Human Capital Officer, John Fernandez, is currently establishing a whole set of standard operating procedures for the Human Resources Department. He expects this one to address this specific piece to be done by the end of September of this year. So our hope is to make sure that we upgrade, well, not our hope, our goal is to upgrade the procedures by which we either document or at least justify the different types of rates that people are being paid for the different types of jobs that they do across the district, particularly when it comes to being paid for with federal dollars. So those were the four findings. There were a couple of deficiencies that were noted in the management letter, and you can read those kind of at length. Deficiencies were just something that they kind of note and they want to bring to attention to us. And we did provide kind of a response or corrective action. These aren't necessarily kind of errors or anything, but it's something where they want us to improve upon to meet certain standards that the federal government has. It's neither considered material or significant. So just, take that into consideration. First deficiency is our inability to locate two lease agreements. For those of you in accounting, there's a huge GASB promulgation now on all of this lease information that we're required to keep and track. Although we have substantial amounts of information and substantial amounts of documentation, there were two specific leases that we could not locate agreements for. Obviously, they want us to implement control and procedures to ensure that we maintain all of the documentation so that authorized transactions are always tied back to documentation that's available. So in anticipation, not so much about this deficiency, but just knowing that the new GASB promulgation on leases is just going to be part of our lives for the foreseeable future, we had already started working on finding a vendor to try to help us kind of stay organized with all of this. So the district has selected DebtBook earlier in May, and it's a software as a service vendor. They're going to help us meet all the GASB 87 requirements specifically related to leases. We'll be able to digitally track all of our lease records, all of the accounting that goes into them, anything that, new, expiring. So it's essentially going to be just a database. This is all they do is they manage GASB 87. There is a new GASB promulgation, GASB 96, on software, business software that has to also be tracked. I forget what the SBTA kind of, I don't know, Bernie, if you remember what the SBITA, the new GASB 96. Yeah, I know. That's the same. So, and I'll get your hand right now, Ray. Let me just kind of finish my thought here. But this system is going to have, this software system is going to help us kind of stay organized. And we're currently, Christina Cruz, our senior accountant, is working on getting all that updated and put in so that essentially the system is just going to be our backup for all of this. We expect this to be rolled out by the end of September so that for the new audit for fiscal year 23, this is just going to be able to just kind of be a turnkey type of system to be able to use to manage leases. So Ray, did you have a question? You're muted if you did. Okay, I'm gonna, feel free to interrupt me. I don't know where you're at. Deficiency number 2 is regarding passwords. So they felt that passwords did not meet the best practice standards that are out there. They want us to enhance the current password settings for our domain administrators, our domain users, which is just every user in the district, and those that manage work within our finance application. So we expect that these standards to be implemented by the 1st of August. We do want to say that student passwords are not going to be part of this upgrade or this update because we have to, we formulate passwords standards based on the grade of a student, right? We're not going to make them write a 14, character password in 5th grade. So it depends on the grade level of the student who has access to a laptop that is connected to the district's network. They're going to be provided certain standards, and teachers obviously are going to be involved in developing those passwords with their kids. Moreover, they ask for multi-factor authentication to be incorporated. We have MFA. We've had MFA since February, not long after the cyber attack took place. So MFA is certainly that's already happening. But these password standards are going to be incorporated. And I didn't outline what those standards are. They're in that management letter. You can see the specific requirements that are being asked of us to complete. So technology services tells me that by August 1 is when they expect to have this happen. Ray, I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a question? Can't hear you if you're talking. Okay. And that's essentially it. I know I threw a lot at you guys, but yeah, I mean, our single audit is something that we take very seriously. It's something that we want to make sure that that we get up to snuff on. Our new auditors are going to oh, Diana put in the chat, subscription-based information technology arrangements. Because it's just part of everybody's everyday vernacular to know that. But that's going to be part of our work we're going to do. Our new auditors will certainly perform a follow-up on our FY22 single audit to verify that in fact we've completed what we've noted in our corrective action. The Department of Education obviously released that global hold on all of our federal dollars. They found the corrective action plan to also be satisfactory. So we're certainly going to be on pace to meet the elements of the corrective action plan. Any questions?
Ricky, this is Bernie. We've got just a few hopefully quick questions here because I know we're getting late here. But on the findings, in particular, you have the tabletop testing or the technical testing to do by the end of the fiscal year, which means really this coming week. Is that scheduled for this week? Coming week?
I've reached out to Rabi Hamadi, the executive director of TS, to confirm with that, and I believe that is scheduled because that is part and parcel of our just overall disaster recovery testing that we do. I want to make sure that he's committed to making sure that the tabletop component particularly is being completed. He is the responsible party for completing that. So as soon as I get an answer back from him, I will confirm with all of you.
I guess then along that way, is IT then also the one that is monitoring the mandatory trainings being actually performed by personnel?
Yeah, so they're web-based. They're through our True North Logic system, which has all our professional development catalog in it. And it tracks everybody's kind of progress and completion. So it will be able to provide information on, by employee or by site, whatever the case may be, to tell us who's either on track, has started, or hasn't even completed as we get closer to the beginning of the school year. Unfortunately, one of our largest chunks of employees are teachers. They're on summer vacation through the last week of July. So the only concern I particularly have is whether those, how many of those teachers may have completed that before they went on summer break. And, the fact that they need to be completed before the start of the new school year, really. But, there's 30 days beyond the start of the school year that teachers and anybody who doesn't work in the summer will have in order to complete that. And that's something that TS is currently tracking using True North Logic.
Are you interacting with IT to see what the status is or what that volume of not completed or completed?
Yeah, so because it just started back in the middle of May, I haven't gotten the most recent report. I know that before we all left on summer break, approximately less than 20%, I want to say, if I recall correctly, had completed the training. So that's probably, I would say probably less than 2,000 people out of like an 8,000 person workforce. Now, not everybody has access to our systems, right? But generally everybody should be completing this mandatory training, even if they just have something as simple as an email with us, which most everybody does. So I am keeping in touch with TS to make sure that they're giving me an up-to-date piece so that I can make sure that we document that for the corrective action in the single audit.
Sure. Okay. Beyond that, on the Davis-Bacon issue, isn't that something that the district would have been doing historically with any federal grants for which there is significant, sizable levels to? And why wasn't it just part of the standard practice for these ESSER grants?
Yeah, I don't know. So beyond ESSER, I don't know. Well, let me restart. Outside of ESSER, we really don't use federal dollars to perform anything that comes into the term of a construction project exceeding the $250,000 level. I know that we have our folks in facilities are very intimately familiar with Davis-Bacon and the requirements of that, but we've never really had to put it into place because anytime we've had to use large sums of dollars for any type of construction or renovation projects, we're using district funding. We're not using federal funding. So this is the first time in a very long time, I would say, that the district has had access to the levels of federal dollars that have allowed us to perform major renovations and construction projects across the district. Why that wasn't in place, I honestly can't speak to why it wasn't. I just know that our staff, my staff knew that happened. That was quickly fixed and kind of turned, but it really wasn't until ESSER 2 came into play, because ESSER 1 really didn't do any dollar or any major kind of renovations. It's ESSER 2 really and ESSER 3, the ones that have kind of started in the last couple of years, that really kicked into high gear when it comes to creating, to performing large types of renovations across district campuses and departments. So, I mean, whether a procedure was there or not, I honestly, obviously, I can tell you that it probably may have not been there or may have not been robust enough, but a lot of it had to do with the fact that we just, school districts just don't get the level of federal dollars that others might get to build things. We don't build schools and things like that.
Using federal money.
Yeah, using federal money. I mean, it's never it's just never been that significant. So the fact that we got an influx of almost $250 million in ESSER money, obviously that lends itself to say, what's the quickest way to spend it without, aside from staff, and that's just to upgrade a lot of the, our air conditioning systems, our water fountain systems, or outdoor learning spaces to create some kind of open air classrooms and things like that.
Would it be your take is that the reason why maybe then the RFPs, IFPs, etc., all that boilerplate of vendor submissions didn't have in it the Davis-Bacon requirements? Probably
so. I mean, and Diana Kerfoot, the purchasing director, is on here, so she can tell you if that's the case, but I would say so. Diana, do you think?
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, Ricky, you covered it when we've not really ever in the past had federal money that we've used for construction projects. It's always been district money, SFB money, that coming in. And then when we started to get the ESSER in, I mean, we're processing things through, and our RFPs and IFBs, RFQs, some RFQs depends on what the level of the spend is, but we have had the language in there, but usually it's one of those optional things that as the buyers go through, they'll kind of pull that out, because we don't necessarily, we look to see that it's budgeted, but then we've always been told in the past, don't worry about what the funding is. Well, now we need to worry what the funding is, because a few months after we started, making some of those purchases with ESSER2, we were starting to go to some meetings with the city of Tucson and Pima County, and they were talking about it, and they're all going, oh, gee, they weren't doing some of those things. And the other school districts that we were talking to were saying, hey, we got to get up to speed on this as well. So I feel like we're not alone in it, but we have definitely added the language to our IFBs, RFPs, all of that's in there now. Several of the projects that were done, going through some of the cooperative contracts that we used, we did find that they were paid with the Davis-Bacon wages, because that was something that was caught on the end of the cooperative. So, I mean, it's definitely something we've gone back and requested information from, I want to say 2 or 3 vendors that Ricky's going to provide me some language that we can give to them, and our project team, project management team and operations has really been on top of it and working, and procurement here, we've been talking to them and making sure that anything now that goes out, it's ask those Davis-Bacon questions, have that on there, have the vendor acknowledge that they know that that is a requirement for them to provide that information back. And it's not really a procurement thing, it's the federal thing that they have to provide that information in turn if we're audited for the federal government. So we definitely are, backtracking and doing what we can, but moving forward, we're making those changes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody have any other questions on the single audit? Hearing none. Has this gone to the board at this point, Ricky?
No, it hasn't. And the plan is to probably bring it in the month of August to them.
And I can't tell from necessarily from our charter that the committee has a obligation to do anything to approve the single audit.
No, I think it's just really disclosing it to all of you, and then ultimately disclosing it to the governing board.
All right, very well. So with that, we'll move us to our next item unless anybody has any last thoughts, questions, or anything. Hearing none, will get us then to our next item, which is review of audit services RFP for Heinfeld and Mesh. And I don't know, Ricky, if you'll want to start this, or Diana, you are going to just take it.
Diana Kerfoot, our purchasing director, is going to kind of take this, and I'll fill in any questions that you guys may have.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I definitely want to thank Ricky, Christina and Fina from Finance, and Bernie for being on the committee, evaluating it through the OpenGov system, which is a new bidding, an online bidding system that the district has started using since the first of the year. The RFP for the audit services, the current audit services contract was expiring June 30th. And toward the end of last calendar year, I was working with Ricky and Fina and Christina on getting a scope gathered together, updating the previous scope that we had used when we went out the 5 years ago. And we had pulled information from various other school districts, and Ricky had sent me quite a bit of information. We put that together in a scope, and then of course the cyber attack happened. But after that, we tried to get together and be able to get this put out, because it was our intention to have a new contract in place for July 1st. The contracts are a 1 year with 4 annual renewals. So it is something that if Ricky would want to bring it to you, and if you all want to, be a part of that decision, say 90 days before the renewal date to review and say, yes, if we want to renew or not. We did go out with that as part of the instructions, 1 year with a possible 4 annual renewals. It will start July 1st and runs for 1 year. And as the audits go, they audit the previous year. So the contract would actually, through 5 years, end on June 30th of 2028, but that would cover the audit of the fiscal year 26-27. We posted it to OpenGov. It's our official bidding service. We used to go through AZ Purchasing, and just to kind of give you a little context, it's a smaller service based out here of Arizona, and several, a lot of people were using them. We were getting it out to maybe a few hundred people. In going with OpenGov, which is something now the city uses and a lot of other school districts in Arizona have moved to it, our notice was sent out to 2,852 vendors. And we received 3 proposals back, 3 submissions that I reviewed, and they were deemed responsible and responsive so that the committee could review them. And the committee was comprised of Ricky, our CFO, of Christina Cruz, our senior account manager, Fina Johnson, the director of finance, and your chairman, Bernie Wingant. And I definitely want to thank them for their, their quick review. We issued it on May 4th. We received the 3 submissions back. The proposal was due back on May 24th. So it was out for 20 days. We did, the scoring was done in 2 phases. With an audit, your pricing is pulled aside. It's submitted as a separate sealed proposal. The first phase is an evaluation of, do the respondents meet specific criteria, and it's a pass fail. So they went through, reviewed the 3 for those 4 criteria, and passed all 3 of the vendors. So those 3 vendors moved into the second phase, which is then the technical and the evaluation criteria. And I just kind of want to let you know kind of what those were. They reviewed the responsiveness to the proposal. Did they review it? Did they respond with what we were looking for? Did they understand, what was going to be expected of them if they were awarded the contract? Technical expertise in the audit, in their audit firm. Things like, what is their auditing in Arizona school districts? Do they audit governments? Are their auditing systems computerized, and do they audit federal programs? Then we also had qualifications of their staff, qualifications of their supervisory staff, and of the audit team that would be performing the field work with us when they come to do the audit. And then just general direction and supervision of the audit firm over the management over those people that are going to be supervising and auditing us from the field. The size and the structure of the audit firm. And then the last is the cost proposal. So once they had evaluated the other technical type of criteria, then it was the cost proposal. And cost is a factor in awarding it, but in an RFP, cost is not the number one. It was 25 points out of a possible 100 points, but going through the vendor who has the lowest price is given a higher score, but with the other evaluation criteria mixed in, it was determined that Heinfield Meach, I'll share my screen here real quick, make sure I have the right one, and you guys let me know if you can see it. That it shows the aggregate score summary. Can you see that? Yes, okay. I'm listening, not looking at that monitor, but the aggregate score summary, and we can always block this out of who did it, but these were the evaluators and the scores, and Heinfield Meach did come out with the highest score. And then just individual scores by their evaluation criteria, where the vendors fell out at. But it was a very interesting process. OpenGov is the first time I've been able to use it and award it. And I hope that, Ricky and Bernie can speak to it, that, if it was, easy to use, if it, definitely helped them, with the evaluation process. But it was taken to the board, and we did award at the last meeting. They did approve the award to Heinfield Meach for the contract to start 7/1, and it will be 1 year with 4 possible annual renewals. So any questions, Ricky, Bernie, did you want to chime in on anything?
No, I'm good.
Thank you, Diana. I guess overall, again, this has gone to the board and has it been approved? Or is it pending their review yet?
Yes, it was approved on the meeting, oh gosh, 16th? Is that when it was?
The
Or when was
13th.
it?
The 13th.
All right.
13th, on the 13th.
So with that, again, I don't know if anybody might have any questions regarding the selection, the process, the so on. In the future, I think we want to try to necessarily obviously catch this earlier in time, but the circumstances were such that it led to it occurring in this really compacted time period.
Correct. We were looking at possibly extending with CLA for an additional year, but because the Auditor General's office, in the agreement that we have with the Auditor General's office, we follow the procurement rule. The state procurement rule says a 5-year contract cannot extend past the 5th year unless we've gone to the governing board before we even issued it to request a longer term than 5 years. Because that wasn't done, going to the Auditor General and saying, hey, we've had these things come up, we want to extend it a year, was just not something that they were going to agree to. So it was something when I got with Ricky and Fina and Christina, we're like, we need to get this out and get this awarded. And so I greatly appreciate you, Bernie, and the others for stepping in and helping me get this across the finish line.
Sure. Well, and it all kind of came down around that Memorial Day weekend, so it was kind of crashing down for us in that way. But it was what it was. In general, one of the things that committee members may want to be aware of is that Heinfeld Misch was actually the audit firm prior to Clifton Larson Allen, and had been with the district for a very long time. I personally would say that they do a lot of work and really blazed a trail in school district audit here, and they are a Tucson-based company rather than, even though the district, as big as it is, can necessarily attract firms from all over. There is some conflict of that the local support isn't necessarily as great with the larger firms because they don't have that support here in Tucson. So they're bringing in that service really from Phoenix or elsewhere, mostly Phoenix. And so to me, that had some value in Heinfeld. But beyond that, I don't know if Rick, you have anything to add. Otherwise, if nobody has any other questions, I can necessarily move us on in our agenda.
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Appreciate it. All right. So with that, we will go on to our next item agenda, which is update from our internal auditor, Martha.
Good afternoon, everybody. And welcome aboard, Mr. Kavanaugh and Mr. Obert. Thank you very much for joining the audit committee. We so greatly appreciate your time, and we definitely welcome all your input, knowledge, and guidance, which I'm sure is going to be quite beneficial. So thank you very much. I know that I only have about, 10 minutes or so, but my presentation is a lot shorter than that. So yay. We're going to start with providing you the very initial part. And this I do just as a foundation, so that way you kind of realize that, well, audit committee is a little bit misunderstood, I would say. The internal audit is even more misunderstood. So I'm going to go ahead and provide you with how internal audits are basically how they come about. I have a little PowerPoint presentation, so just bear with me and we'll get through it. Yolanda, can I get share, please?
You should be able to, Martha.
Perfect. Now, this is always a little bit tricky for me, so I apologize for any delays. Here we go. Can everybody see it? Can you see my screen? Oh, thank you. I could see Val. Thank you, Val. Okay. And I'm not sure why that's there. Okay, I guess it's going to take me a little bit longer than the 3 minutes, but here we go. The internal audit is based on risk. That is the main purpose of, or the foundation of the actual audit itself, of internal audit. After that, I want to just define what is internal audit. And what it is a lot of communication. It is based on a scope. It is based on quite a bit of standards, guidelines, and requirements that are need to be followed. I'm not going to read them word by word for you. I figured that we're just going to go through the slides, and hopefully if you have any questions, by all means, just feel free to interrupt me. One of the major things that I noticed is that a lot of people are not quite sure what is the difference between the external auditor versus the internal auditor. And this is quite appropriate since we just selected a new company that is going to be doing our external audits. The main difference is that they're not an employee. They're 100% an external. They are contracted. They're, I guess, in a way, considered a vendor. On the other hand, internal audit is considered an employee. The focus of internal audit is mainly to help the organization with its goals. The external audit pretty much performs that single audit, and that is their main focus. Internal audit is vested, meaning there's a lot riding on the opinion, not necessarily the opinion, but on the findings of the internal auditor. If I'm saying that something is incorrect, that is based on an actual standard or a guideline or the internal or the actual district policy, therefore is going to be substantiated with that. Also, I look at some areas that might be a little bit more nitpicky, but the whole point of that is to try to go ahead and get ahead or be proactive instead of reactive. External audits are mainly assessment audits, which means, okay, this is what we're looking at, and they mainly look at financial audits or financial processes or results or risk. On the other hand, I look at pretty much anything and everything that is a possible risk, such as internal controls. It could be operational, it could be just, again, it could actually be investigations of fraud. It varies. It's a very wide array of things that I look at. So what are the types of audits? I just kind of covered that for you already. So therefore, you're kind of get a little glimpse of this. The main ones are asset assessment, which is compliance and regulations, consultation or advisory in nature. And that's basically stating that we're not going to go out to the world and let them know this is what's happening. It's more like speaking with management and trying to get an idea of what areas have concerns mainly. A lot of consultations come in when there's either a new person that is being in charge of a department, such as somebody leaving and then another person coming in to take over the activities of the department. It could be based on new software, new processes. Consultations are commonly for the benefit of management. A combination of both sometimes tends to be what is called a review. And a review is a little bit smaller or less of an invasive look than a consultation or an assessment audit, meaning it's very much a bird's eye view where you actually look at something that could potentially have an issue, but you're not going to go dig into it and verify that it is in fact an issue. You'll look a little bit into it, but you're not going to dig into the actual facts of it. And why conduct internal audits? Bottom line is to evaluate the effectiveness of the organization's objectives, programs, activities, and assist with the achievement of the goals. And on this particular case has to do with achieving the strategic plan that Dr. Trujillo has put in place.
Excuse me, Martha?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you're, because we only see your front page, the internal audit part. So we're not seeing the actual screen or
And
the
here I am,
actual.
just going on. I apologize.
No,
Let
that's
me
okay.
see. Where are we? Okay. I do not know where it's at. Well, nothing like technical difficulties here. Can you see it a little bit better? Or still not?
We're seeing the spreadsheet right now.
Okay. Wow, that's not good. Give me a second here if you don't mind. Okay. You should be able to see that right now, right? Can you see the screen?
We can see the screen, but we don't see each slide. We only see the front page, the internal audit part.
Can you see it now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Apologies for that wonderful technical difficulty there. More like a challenge. So using the audit universe, there's several things that break down of how an audit gets composed. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because the two items that I'm going to be addressing, or mostly the main item that I'm going to be addressing, has to do with the annual audit. And that is the audits that are going to be performed for this coming year. So the main thing that gets done is an audit universe. This is kind of like a bucket where you collect all the potential or possible audits that could be done in a lifetime if time and money were not an issue whatsoever. Okay. The current Office of Internal Audit has one individual, that is myself. So I end up doing a lot of the follow-ups. I end up doing the management of the department. I as well go ahead and prepare the annual assessments that are coming up. I present to you guys. I go ahead and prepare as much as possible for all the upcoming audits as well as the follow-ups, but we'll get into that a little bit later. There's some terminology, so I'm going to go ahead and provide you just a little glimpse of it. The main one has to do with the risk, which is the possibility of an event occurring that will have an impact on the achievement of the objectives. So what are the objectives? What that is, in essence, is what is it that internal audit is trying to accomplish? Am I looking at operational issues? Am I looking at internal audits? Am I looking at a combination of both? Based on that, that's how these objectives come about. They get selected based on, is there an inherited risk? That would mean, okay, after we have all these things in place, after we look at the internal controls, after we look at all that could possibly go wrong, what is it that we do have in place that would make a difference and therefore not make it as impactful as it could be? And again, I'm not going to read each one of them, so feel free to go ahead and read along. The next one has to do with risk management. So it processes to identify, assess, manage, and control potential events or situations to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the organization's objectives. The reason why I emphasize reasonable is because it's an impossibility to be able to capture every single possible thing that could go wrong. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, and if I had a team of 10, that'd be great. However, being just one individual, I tend to prioritize and look at the areas that would have the greatest potential risk and impact on the actual district. Controls, there are actions taken by management, the board, and other parties to manage risk and increase the likelihood that the established objectives and goals will be achieved. Now, before we get a little too deep into that, which again, there is a little example there. The example of the controls are the policies, the procedures, the processes, the guidelines, rules, and regulations. The way the risk is assessed is as follows. There's two major categories, and one of them is the impact. The other one is the probability. Each one of them has 5 sections. And one of them is criticality of the unit department. In other words, what's the functionality? how much is it necessary to continue to operate? Well, most of our departments are very much essential. Then we have the financial impact. How is it going to affect us? Is there a possibility of somebody suing us? Regulatory compliance has to do 100% with who do we report to, what policy or regulation are we not following. Information sensitivity, again, is this very sensitive, such as the technology services? They have some areas that, yes, they are audited, but you cannot put them in a public document for everybody else to be aware of. This is the serial of our server, so to speak. Public sensitivity obviously has to do with how does the public view this particular issue that we're looking at. Then we go into probability. The control environment, are people or is management, how involved are they? Is this something that we have a policy for? Do we not have one? What I stated before is the change in management. Like, I'm just going to take the example of HR. We recently had Mr. Fernandez join the district, which is great, wonderful, and I'm looking forward to auditing him. Yes, I'm sure that he's looking forward to that as well. But it is an opportunity for not only provide some views of what has happened in the past, but also to provide him with some answers or some guidance if he has any, or if he has any questions. The next has to do with complexity of the monitoring activity. HR, again, using them as an example, they're very complex. We hire people, we discipline people, and we release people, and they retire. So there's a lot of moving parts that come into effect when it comes to the complexity. So that's also going to rank or provide certain points as far as how high of a risk is this. And then the integrity of operations, again, how long has this person been doing this? Have they have success, or do we have new policies, new procedures that we put in place? And then the audit history. Have they been audited before? If they have, then we just kind of take whatever was viewed in the past and add to the objectives of what we're looking to accomplish. The risk assessment, this is in general the format of how it will look. If it's serious, then obviously it's going to rank high on the impact and perhaps high on the probability. And it would be one of the first ones to be scheduled to be audited. And then it goes down from there. So low in the possibilities might be opening mail. I don't know, that's just an example. So it is the annual audit itself is based on the risk of each one of these categories. And this is just a general example for you to see. A lot of times when I do assessments, it comes down to time versus money. Sometimes the issue that I find might be very important, but it's very time consuming, or it might be very expensive. In either case, it's up to management to decide how they handle it. My job is to make them aware so they can make an informed decision. That brings us to the annual audit plan, which I'm going to go ahead and scurry over. I'm going to stop this. Oh, we only have 2 slides or 3 slides. So, but the annual audit plan itself is quite a little large of a document. And can you see that screen? Or not would be good. Bernie?
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we can.
Okay, this is what the audit universe looks like. It is broken into quarters, which is when we meet. So therefore, I try to actually mimic what the times that we get to meet. Right now, it's unrealistic that I'll ever be able to accomplish 261 audits, because it takes anywhere from 4 to actually 6 to 8 weeks to accomplish one particular audit. So therefore, 261 is a little bit excessive. But that just kind of gives you a general idea that there is quite a bit of audits to be done. And those are all internal, and they all vary in importance. They all vary as far as departments and activities. This is the actual annual audit plan. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where the legend of the risk assessment has to do with the serious, high, and so forth. As you could see, the first one that is scheduled to be audited right now is the employee relations. And the reason for that is because it was scheduled for this year. Unfortunately, we had that incident with the technology incident, and we were not able to perform it, so it got rescheduled. But right now that one ranks at 35, 37, 36. Now, Bernie asked me before a very, very good question is like, well, why am I starting at 37? It's not that I'm starting at 37. If you look back on the audit universe, that's because all of these have already been performed. And all of these ranked, I believe that one ranked like 42, 43, and so forth. So I'm working my way down to hopefully the 2s and the 3s. But right now I am at 36. The other thing that contributes to this is that every year, not really every year, every quarter, I look at this audit universe and I go ahead and reassess where are these audits. I'm not going to change the ones that are already scheduled for this year because that is the point of providing you this particular schedule. That way, you know, these are the audits that are coming. However, if there is somebody that decides that, hey, you know what, we have this particular incident that happened, it might be a good idea to look into it. Then at that point, there's a whole nother process that comes into place and goes ahead and inserts it in this particular schedule, if it's that essential. And right now, that has not necessarily happened, but it could happen. The last one has to do with the follow-up. Follow-ups are interesting because they are audits that have been completed. However, just because you complete an audit, that doesn't mean that I'm done. Now I have to go back and verify that management has implemented the things that were discussed with them during the exit meeting. And I'm not going to go into all the detail because this is fairly long in detail. And I know that we pretty much ran out of time, but I am happy to go ahead and share this with you. And you could review it, you could look it over, and you could go ahead and feel free to ask me questions. Any questions at this time? With that being said, that is the end of my presentation. Oh, I did want to correct a couple of things. There's no discussion based on that number 3 that was provided pending regulations that are with the legal department. We already discussed that on the last meeting, as well as the grants and federal program department. Those two were addressed in the last meeting. So therefore, they're not part of my presentation in this meeting. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay, then Bernie, I turn it back to you. Thank you guys for your time and welcome aboard once again.
Thank you, Martha. You know, those schedules that Martha's just shown us right at the end here are really pretty detailed and quite a bit of an eye chart. But I would highly suggest that each of us spend time with those to try to get familiar with what her work products are, as well as what her program, what her plan is for going through audit subjects. And to that end, if you have questions regarding any of that, Martha's always available to help you understand those schedules. And I certainly can help as well, to the extent that I'm not necessarily stepping, over any boundaries there. And to that end, if you see something on the schedules that you think should otherwise be at a different priority level than is being shown, that's certainly something then to be able to be brought forward for us to have a conversation on, and that perhaps then the particular item could be changed in its position. But again, Martha, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will move along to our next agenda item, which is a discussion regarding the possible return to in-person committee meetings. For some of us on the committee, that was a process that we did. Primarily, it was all pre-COVID, that we met at district headquarters there on 1010 East 10 on a Friday afternoon, not unlike that we are now. But then, of course, with COVID, the whole world changed with respect to processes like this. So, this has had its benefits of not necessarily having to migrate down to the district office, but at the same token, there are some growing pains for which I have been extremely problematic for me getting up to speed on Zoom and having to deal with some of the clunkiness of it. But with that, I will open this up to conversation, discussion regarding the possibility of returning to in-person meetings.
Bernie?
Yes, and I'm sorry.
I'd like to speak for a moment or two.
Certainly, Kevin, go
Particularly
ahead.
as a new member, and really not having any significant relationships with members of the committee, I think it would be a real benefit, as infrequently as we meet, to meet at 10:10 and have access potentially to somebody like Martha Smith, if it was really important, who lives, I presume, a floor above where we'd meet. I'd also like to be able to establish a real personal relationship with the other members of the committee, who obviously I don't know. I just think the benefits post-COVID will get back up to speed and really provide value a lot more quickly by meeting in person, allowing for the Zoom option for those that still would prefer it. But fundamentally, looking to meet together in person at 10:10.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Bernie, can I just talk a little bit about the logistics of both the meetings at 10:10 and then also at Duffy as a possibility?
Certainly. Go ahead, Yolanda, please.
So I've been working with our communications team as far as getting everything ready for coming back to in-person the way you used to have them there at 10:10 in the conference room. So we obviously, if everybody is in person, we have the audio set up, then that's already been checked and that's working, where it would just be an audio recording of the meetings. If we do hold Zoom, we do have a little TV that's set up in there that we were able to connect a laptop to hold the Zoom meeting on, but it's a small screen. So if there's more than one of you on Zoom, you're barely going to be able to see one another. And then the other bad effect with that is that the people that will be on Zoom will not be able to see the people that are in person. Obviously they'll be able to hear us and we'll have that communication. We would do the recording like we're doing right now with the Zoom. So the other option would be to go to Duffy, where everything would be already set up. So anybody on Zoom would still be able to see the people there in the boardroom where we hold the board meetings. So the people in Zoom would be able to see everybody there. And then we have all the equipment for the live streaming and audio and stuff there as well. So that's just kind of the other option that we were kind of discussing when we were going through the room yesterday.
Right. Thank you. Let me clarify something there. When you say Duffy, is that not where the governing board meets now?
Yes, where the governing board meets now. So we would be able to set up tables in front of the dais for the committee members. And then, like I said, everybody, we'd have the live stream connection there to have the meetings. And then those on Zoom would be able to see the committee members that are there at Duffy.
Thank you. And just for reference, that's, I believe, at 5th and
5th and Rosemont, right on the
Rosemont. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, the only thing I'm not sure about with respect to staff's interaction, you know, in the past when we used to do the in-person meetings at the district boardroom there at 10:10, most everything was provided in a paper mechanism, and then towards the very end of, or the latter part of that time, we got to where we were working off laptops, similar, so that we necessarily would be similar to what we're doing, say, on our own computers, except that I'm not sure the interaction with staff's ability to present like has been presented today, where there's the ability to take hold of the screen and make their presentations, or if they need to be doing that currently from their own workplace.
I think if that would be, we'd probably have to set up a projector and a screen inside the room, and so that presenters would be able to bring up their presentations.
So that currently, when with respect to say like the board meetings, those are necessarily more of a PowerPoint presentation or a presentation that is otherwise created and then presented in the board room, but isn't necessarily drawing from, don't have the capacity as we have today to be able to have somebody able to draw from their own system and project it to the meeting.
We would probably just have the attachments provided to us prior to the meeting, and we can bring those up during the actual meeting.
And, you know, so I guess along that way, again, I don't know if anybody has any further thoughts on this.
Bernie,
Sure.
I would
Dr.
like
Kelly?
to see in person, because it would get me out and meet with people more than just talking to people on a computer. There's a certain amount of involvement in the meeting, and I would get to work with the people face to face instead of sitting in a wheelchair or sitting or walking using my walker. I think some of the issues we tend to assume a lot when we're doing it on screen, whereas if we're talking with people and sitting there and discussing a problem, it's more realistic to me. And that's why I agreed also to send a letter to you as chairman saying we should look at it. Because, you know, it's like you're talking to a computer. You're not talking to a real person. You are, but you're really not facing them and getting away from the home and meeting with them. So there's benefits to it. I get too comfortable where I'm at.
Well, certainly that is understandable, and you know, certainly, you know, this process that required us to go to a interactive or electronic process like this was thrust upon us with technology that is in its infancy, and so it's extremely difficult to migrate through and to facilitate. Someday, I think this will be just kind of the common process that we do meetings in large measure, depending on the nature of the meeting. But the process, you know, the technology and our ability to consume the technology needs to go through a great deal more development, and even initial conversation that I had with staff, and in particular Ricky, was that I was interested in necessarily looking at us getting back to in-person meetings, at least in part. So I personally am not adverse to it in any way. I'm just not. I have mixed feelings about it, because I also see the value of being able to pop onto these meetings just prior to the time, rather than having to necessarily predict what the timing is going to be to be able to get to where the meeting location is going to be. And one of the other side benefits personally is that as we've been going through, and I apologize with Martha with her presentation through earlier, I was following her PowerPoint that I otherwise have on another screen and wasn't paying attention to our, what was being fed to us. I do that with virtually all those things that we have going on so that I have the ability to look at many of the electronic items we have that I would otherwise need to have in print or somehow have with me wherever the meeting would be. So again, that could be an inherent issue with having in-person meetings versus these decentralized meetings. So with that, again, I don't know if anybody else has anything want to add or interject.
So I also just wanted to offer if any of the committee members wanted to kind of take a tour, especially the new ones, to take a tour at the conference room there at 1010 or at Duffy. I can meet everybody there at Duffy, and that way you can kind of see the setup there.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Now, do we have Rob still on with us?
So Rob is on, but he's on as an attendee, and we've not been able to get him. Oh, there he is. He just popped up.
And Rob, I just wanted to ask you whether or not, as a committee, do we need to necessarily, take action on, where we would meet, or is that something that we could necessarily just plan for? And if so, how would we do that without necessarily, violating open meeting laws by having a conversation regarding it? Nice. See him there. Oh, here he is. Not hearing anything, Rob.
How about now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm in the vehicle now, so I don't know which one's working correctly, the phone or the car. You can, the decision to go to remote was not a vote. You could just, get a sense of the committee and make a decision, or you're also, since this was set up as I think a study action or an action item, you're also free to take a vote on it. So, it's really the will of the chair and the committee. If someone wants to make a motion, they're able to do that. This was set up as a potential action item.
Sure. And I did necessarily place it into this section just so that we had the ability to take action if we were so inclined, or if we were so inclined and it wasn't placed here that I didn't want to be enjoined from being able to do so. So to that end, I don't know if any committee member would like to make a motion regarding meeting in person for some or all of our meetings that have been were scheduled last meeting and are scheduled for August, November, February of next year, and then May as well of next year. As at least those are our scheduled meetings currently. So
I know Mr. Oberg had to step away from the computer real quick. He had a phone call that came on in, so he's letting this last couple minutes of what you were mentioning, just so you know.
Okay. I'm not sure then, Rob, right now, if we don't have a quorum, that I just need to suspend the meeting. There are 3 of us present.
Out of 5, right?
Oh, and then now 4, and we're okay.
You had 3 out of 5, right?
Back,
Yes, that's correct.
I'm back. Kevin
Yeah.
Oberg was back.
Okay. Well, Kevin, I was just asking if anybody wanted to necessarily make a motion about about returning to meeting in person for some or all of our scheduled meetings for this coming fiscal year.
Yeah, I'd be interested in making that motion, and I'd like to make it as flexible as possible that for the next meeting, we consider either 1010 or the alternate, Duffy, and provide the option on Zoom/hybrid.
And do I have a second?
Second.
And I got a second from Dr. Kelly. So I have a motion from Kevin Oberg with a second from Dr. Kelly to have our future meetings occur in person at either 1010 East 10th district offices or at Duffy Elementary, whichever is determined to be most suitable, and also for members to participate via an electronic means such as Zoom, and that the meeting would be then hybrid. With that, again, I don't know if there's any conversation or discussion regarding that motion. Hearing none, I will then look for us to then vote on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And aye. So I believe I have a unanimous vote there, but just to be sure, were there any nays? That's right, hearing none, the motion carries. So our subsequent meetings will be again at a place to be at either place indicated to be notified to members of the committee based on the determination as to which is best suitable. Okay, with that then, we'll move to the next agenda item, and that is complaints received since our last meeting. I have not received any. Rob, I don't know if you have received any.
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. So it would seem then there's nothing for that agenda item, and I will move us on to the next, which is any requests for information from the district, by the audit committee. I don't know, in the past, we've had somewhat a shopping list of things that we've looked to get. I don't know, that there's anything that is beyond kind of those things that we've necessarily seen today, as they would be necessarily on the agenda for next time. But again, I don't know, leave that open for a moment, see if anybody has anything to ask management for in terms of information. And hearing none, I will move on to our next item, which is just future agenda items, future items. I don't know if anybody has any ideas or any specific things you'd like to see on our next agenda or future agendas. And hearing none, certainly you can always necessarily get word to me on something that you would like to see perhaps on the agenda. And I'll look to see how that could be added to a future agenda. And so with that, that brings us to our last agenda item, and that is to get a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
And I will second that. So I have a motion from Dr. Kelly with a second from myself to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And again, I believe I have a all ayes, but just to be sure, are there any nays? Very well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate this. It's been somewhat a longer meeting than we've had in the past, but appreciate all members of staff hanging in with us right here until the bitter end. Thank you again. We'll see you in 2 months.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.